The spring Clara Mae Jennings turned 18. The desert was in bloom, a rare, short-lived miracle that painted the Arizona plains in soft pinks and yellows. To the townspeople of Red Rock, it was a sign of blessing, and they said so freely, smiling as they pinned flowers to Clara's hair and watched her walk down the aisle of the little wooden chapel at the edge of town. The groom, Sheriff James Holt, stood waiting, tall, broad-shouldered, and weathered by years under the frontier sun. His silver badge caught the light as if it too were a part of the ceremony. At 41, he was a man of gravity, respected and obeyed by every rancher and outlaw for miles around. No one dared question why he was marrying a girl young enough to be his daughter. In Red Rock, a sheriff's word was as good as law, and a young woman's prospects were few. Clara's hands trembled as she clutched her bouquet of desert wildflowers, their scent sharp and sweet. She didn't quite know if she was happy. Her father had said she was lucky, that marrying a man like James Holt meant safety, a roof, a name that commanded respect. After her mother's death the year before, safety had seemed a fine enough dream. Love, she was told, could come later. She had met the sheriff only twice before the wedding, once in her father's store, where James had come to buy new boots and left with his eyes fixed on her like a man studying something precious he could not name. The second time, he came to their house at sunset with a box of peppermint candies and an offer. Her father accepted before she could find her voice, and so here she was, standing beside a man she barely knew, the preacher's words washing over her like warm rain. When James took her hand in his, she noticed how large and rough his palm felt against hers, the hand of a man who had known hard work and harder justice. "You'll be well looked after, Clara Mae," he whispered, his tone kind but final, like a promise wrapped in command. After the vows, the town gathered in the saloon for pie, coffee, and laughter. Clara smiled where she could, but something in her chest felt tight. She saw the way the older women whispered, their eyes darting toward the sheriff, then away. One of them, Mrs. Calhoun, who kept the boarding house, pressed a hand to Clara's shoulder and said softly, "You're a brave girl, child." Then she moved on. Her lips set in a line Clara didn't understand. That evening, James lifted her onto his horse, his arm steady around her waist, and they rode toward the horizon where the sun bled red over the desert hills. The air was still warm, filled with the sound of cicadas and the distant cry of a coyote. When the town's last lights disappeared behind them, Clara looked ahead and saw the outline of her new home, a sprawling ranch house surrounded by dry land and silence. "It's quiet out here," she murmured, trying to sound braver than she felt. James smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "That's the way I like it, peaceful." As they dismounted, she saw the worn rocking chair on the porch, the curtains drawn tight across the windows, and an Apache talisman hanging from the doorframe, feathers, beads, and bones strung together. She reached out to touch it, curious, but James caught her wrist gently. "Leave that be," he said. "It's just something left from before." He didn't say from whom before meant, but Clara knew. The entire town whispered about the sheriff's first wife, the Apache woman who had died suddenly 2 years prior. Some said she'd been wild, others that she'd been kind. No one spoke of her name aloud anymore. As the stars spread above the desert sky, Clara followed her husband into the house. The floorboards creaked underfoot and a cool wind drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of sage. She didn't yet know it, but she was stepping into a story far older and darker than her own. That night, when James blew out the lamp, the desert was silent. But as Clara drifted toward sleep, she could have sworn she heard soft footsteps outside and the faint whisper of a woman's voice in the wind. The days that followed Clara's wedding settled into a strange rhythm. Quiet, measured, almost too still. The desert around the ranch stretched endlessly in every direction, a golden ocean that shimmered beneath the sun and vanished into violet haze at dusk. There were no neighbors for miles, only the occasional rider passing by or the buzz of cicadas breaking the silence. To Clara, the solitude felt both peaceful and heavy, like the air before a storm. James spent most of his time in town, leaving before dawn and returning after dark. "Duties of the badge," he said whenever she asked. He rode out with a rifle across his back and a revolver at his hip, the weight of his office carved into his expression. Clara would stand on the porch and watch the dust trail fade behind him, wondering what sort of law a man had to keep in a place where there was hardly anyone left to break it. When she was alone, She explored the house, cautiously, like a guest who wasn't sure she was welcome. The rooms were tidy, though filled with the faint scent of sage and smoke. She noticed things that didn't belong to her. A pair of embroidered moccasins tucked beneath the wardrobe, a thin braid of black hair tied with a red string in a drawer, and a series of symbols etched into the wooden beams above the doorways. At first, she thought they were just scratches, the kind made by time and weather. But the marks were deliberate, circular patterns, crossed lines, and small shapes that looked like suns and eyes. Someone had carved them carefully with meaning. She asked James about them once. His face hardened. "Don't touch those," he said, his tone sharper than she had ever heard. "They're old. From before. Always that word. Always left hanging in the air like a ghost." That night, she tried to ask him more about the woman who came before her. "Your first wife," she said gently. "The townsfolk said she passed. What was her name?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice so low she almost didn't catch it, he said, "Naya." Nothing more. The name hung between them like a candle flame. Naya. The sound of it stirred something. Not jealousy, exactly, but unease. Later, when James was asleep, Clara rose from bed and walked through the house by moonlight. She paused by the parlor where a single portrait hung above the mantel, a simple charcoal drawing of a woman's face. The features were delicate, proud, the eyes dark and calm. There was a beauty in that face that seemed alive, and Clara found herself staring at it for what felt like hours. In the morning, she told herself she'd imagined the faint whisper she'd heard while she stared, a soft breath like someone sighing her name. But when she looked at the portrait again, she could have sworn the woman's eyes were no longer looking past her, but at her. Days bled into one another. Clara began to sense a presence, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Sometimes she'd wake to find the window open, curtains fluttering though she was sure she had latched them. Once she found fresh sage scattered on the hearth, though she hadn't put it there. She wrote a letter to her father back in Kansas, describing her new home and the strange silence that seemed to live within it. But she never sent it. When she tried to seal the envelope, the wax wouldn't harden. The flame of the lamp kept flickering out, as if the air itself refused to hold warmth. One evening, as the sun fell behind the red hills, James returned home in a foul mood. There had been trouble in town, a fight at the saloon, talk of Apache raiders nearby. He poured himself a drink and stared into the fire. Finally, he said, without looking at her, "If you hear anything at night, voices, footsteps, don't pay them any mind. This land holds memories. That's all." But when he turned away, Clara caught sight of the beads on his wrist, the same colors she had seen on the portrait's necklace, red, white, and black. That night, she dreamed of a woman standing outside her window, long black hair, eyes like polished stone. The woman lifted a hand and whispered in a language Clara didn't understand. And when she woke, the room smelled faintly of smoke and wild sage. By the 3rd month of her marriage, Clara no longer tried to convince herself that the noises in the house were only the wind. The ranch was too far from town for anyone to wander close, and yet some nights she could hear footsteps in soft, steady, deliberate, moving across the porch long after James had gone to sleep. At first she told herself it was an animal, a stray coyote perhaps, or the creak of the boards cooling after sunset. But once, when she gathered the courage to peer through the window, she saw the faint outline of a woman standing by the sycamore tree, still as stone, her dress fluttering in the wind. When Clara blinked, the figure was gone. The next morning, she found footprints in the dirt, barefoot, small. She didn't tell James. He'd only grow angry again, and she had learned that he preferred his silences undisturbed. When he was home, he sat in the parlor polishing his revolver, or staring into the fire as if searching for something that never appeared. Clara spent her days cleaning, partly to pass time, partly to chase away the dread that seemed to hang over every corner. But no matter how much she scrubbed, the house still felt inhabited. Dust settled faster than she could wipe it away. The air always carried the faint scent of smoke and sage, even though she hadn't burned any. One afternoon, while sweeping the cellar stairs, she noticed a loose board in the wall. Curious, she pried it open and found a small wooden box tucked inside. Inside the box lay 3 items: A bundle of raven feathers, a strip of red cloth, and a smooth stone etched with the same markings she'd seen carved into the beams above the door. The stone was warm to the touch, though the cellar was cool as shadow. She replaced the box quickly, heart hammering, and spent the rest of the day glancing over her shoulder. That night, as James prepared for bed, she asked him about it. "There's a box in the cellar," she said, "with feathers and a red cloth inside. Do you know what it is?" His face went pale. He turned to her sharply. "You opened it?" I only looked." "Don't ever touch that again," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "It's Apache medicine. Nothing good comes from meddling with it." He left the room after that, pacing outside until the floorboards creaked beneath his boots. When he finally returned, he didn't speak. But Clara noticed that the box was gone from the cellar by morning. She began to feel watched. Not by James, and by something else. The air in the parlor sometimes turned cold for no reason. The rocking chair on the porch would sway gently even when there was no wind. And once, while sewing by lamplight, she heard a soft humming, a woman's voice, low and mournful, coming from the next room. When she rose to look, the room was empty. The townspeople had started to notice changes in her, too. When she rode into town for supplies, Mrs. Calhoun squinted at her and said, "You're looking pale, dear. The desert sun's not treating you kindly." Clara tried to smile. "It's the quiet," she said. "I'm still getting used to it." But that night she woke to a thudding sound, 3 sharp knocks as if someone had struck the wall beside her bed. James was gone again, out on patrol. The house was dark, the moonlight spilling in through the window like silver smoke. She rose, wrapped herself in a shawl, and followed the sound down the hall. It led her to the parlor, to the portrait of the woman above the mantel. Only now there was something different about it. The woman's expression had changed. The faint trace of a smile that had once been there was gone, replaced by something colder. Beneath the portrait, a few sprigs of dried sage had appeared on the hearth, as though someone had placed them there in offering. Clara stared for a long time before whispering, "Naya." A gust of wind blew through the chimney, scattering the sage across the floor. And though she couldn't be sure, Clara thought she heard a whisper answer back, a single word carried through the wind. "Listen." The following week brought an early summer heat that pressed against the land like a hand. The air shimmered above the desert floor, and the horizon seemed to ripple and bend beneath the weight of the sun. Inside the ranch house, Clara kept the curtains drawn and moved slowly from room to room, her head aching from the constant hum of insects outside and the uneasy silence within. James had ridden north with a posse after reports of stolen cattle, leaving her alone for several days. Clara told herself she didn't mind. The house felt easier to breathe in when he was gone, but that also meant she was alone with the strange things that still stirred after dark. She spent her time cleaning and rearranging, trying to give the house a sense of her own. In the parlor, she replaced the faded curtains. In the bedroom, she moved the bed closer to the window so she could see the stars. But no matter what she changed, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, quietly disapproving. One afternoon, while sweeping in the back room, a place James rarely entered, she noticed a loose floorboard beneath the window. It wasn't much, just a small corner that rose slightly higher than the rest. She knelt and pressed on it. The board shifted, revealing a narrow hollow beneath. Inside lay a single object, a beaded necklace. Half buried in dust, the beads shimmered faintly, even in the dim light, tiny orbs of turquoise red coral and bone threaded together in a delicate pattern. It was beautiful, clearly handmade, but what struck her most was that she recognized it. The same necklace hung around the woman's throat in the charcoal portrait above the mantel. Naya's necklace. Clara hesitated. The air seemed to still around her. Then, almost against her own will, she reached down and lifted it out. The moment her fingers touched the beads, a strange warmth spread up her arm, as though the necklace were alive. She gasped and nearly dropped it, but the warmth wasn't painful. It was familiar, comforting even. For a moment she thought she heard a faint melody, the same low, rhythmic hum she had heard the night before, as if someone were singing just beyond her reach. When she blinked, the sound was gone and the room was silent again. That evening, she wore the necklace almost without realizing it. It rested lightly against her throat, the beads cool now, no longer warm. She sat by the window as twilight fell, watching the desert fade into shadow. The necklace felt strangely protective, as if a barrier had formed between her and the darkness pressing in from the plains. But as the moon rose, the dreams came. She saw flashes, a woman running barefoot through the desert, the same necklace glinting against her skin. A baby's cry echoed through the night. Then a man's voice, angry, shouting her name, and the sound of thunder that wasn't thunder at all. When Clara woke, her pillow was damp with sweat, and the necklace was gone from her neck. She searched the bed, the floor, even the hallway. Finally, she found it lying on the parlor floor beneath Naya's portrait, the beads glinting in the lamplight. Her heart hammered. She hadn't gone near the parlor. That morning, when James returned, she tried to tell him about the necklace, how she'd found it, how it seemed to move on its own. But before she could finish, his expression changed. His eyes fixed on the beads around her hand, and something like fear flashed across his face. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. It was hidden under the floorboard. He snatched it from her hand so fast that the string snapped, scattering beads across the floor. "Don't you ever wear that again," he said, his voice shaking. "Do you hear me, Clara? That thing brings nothing but trouble." He swept the beads into his palm and stalked out of the room. She heard him outside, cursing under his breath, the sound of something being thrown into the fire pit. That night, the air in the house grew thick with smoke and sage. Clara tried to sleep but couldn't. Just before dawn, she rose to fetch a drink of water and stopped cold. On the windowsill beside the bed, neatly arranged in a small circle, were 5 of the necklace's beads, red, white, turquoise, and one of bone, the same pattern as before. The morning after the beads reappeared, the desert was unnaturally still. Not even the cicadas sang. Clara stood on the porch, clutching her shawl, her eyes fixed on the ridge beyond the dry riverbed. The land there rose sharply, dotted with boulders and twisted mesquite trees. It was lonely country, the sort of place even the wind seemed to avoid. That's when she saw her. A woman, small and stooped, stood on the ridge's edge, her dark silhouette outlined against the pale sky. She wasn't moving, just watching. Even from a distance, Clara could see the glint of silver hair and the shimmer of beads woven into long braids. Clara blinked, certain her eyes were playing tricks. When she looked again, the woman was still there, watching. For reasons she couldn't name, Clara felt no fear. Instead, a strange calm spread through her. She raised a hand, a tentative greeting. The woman didn't wave back, but lifted something, a small bundle wrapped in red cloth, and held it up high, as if showing her a sign. Then, just as suddenly as she'd appeared, the woman turned and vanished behind the rocks. All morning, Clara tried to distract herself. She baked bread, washed the linens, fed the hens, but her thoughts kept returning to the ridge. Who was that woman? A traveler? An Apache? James had warned her that raiders sometimes passed through, but there had been no raids for months. When James came home that afternoon, she told him what she'd seen. "There was a woman up by the ridge," she said. "Older, Apache, I think. She didn't threaten me, just stood there." James froze mid-step. The light in his eyes went dark. "You're sure?" "Yes, she had something in her hands. A red bundle." He dropped his hat onto the table and poured himself a drink. "If you see her again, you come inside and lock the doors. Don't speak to her. Don't even look too long." "Why? Who is she?" He didn't answer, just said quietly, "Some ghosts walk while the sun's still up." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Every sound, every gust of wind, every settling groan of the wood set her nerves on edge. She dreamed of the woman again, but this time, the figure was closer, standing by the porch steps, her braids swaying in the wind, the red bundle cradled in her arms. In the dream, Clara spoke without fear. "What do you want?" The woman's eyes lifted. They were dark and deep, like wells that had no bottom. "She waits for truth," the woman said softly in accented English. "The dead do not sleep when lies are buried with them." Clara woke gasping, the sound of those words still echoing in her ears. When she rose to drink from the wash basin, she noticed something strange. A single footprint in the thin layer of dust by the door. Barefoot, small, and fresh. By noon, Clara's unease had turned to determination. She climbed the ridge herself. The sun beat down hard and the air shimmered around her like glass. The climb was steeper than it looked from the house, and more than once she stumbled on the rocks. When she reached the top, she found a small circle of stones and a fire pit long cold. Ashes scattered, but something glinted among them, a bead of turquoise. She knelt, brushed it free, and felt that same strange warmth she'd felt from the necklace. Suddenly, a whisper rose behind her, soft, but close enough to raise the hairs on her neck.
"You wear her beads," Clara turned sharply.
The old woman was there, no more than 10 paces away. Her skin was weathered like old leather, her eyes sharp as obsidian. She carried a walking stick carved with symbols and wore a necklace that matched the broken one Clara had found. Clara's mouth went dry. "Who are you?" The woman regarded her quietly, then said, "I am called Tsani. I am of the same blood as Naya Holt, the woman who wore those beads before you." Clara's heart thudded. "You mean the sheriff's first wife?" Tsani nodded slowly. "His wife, yes. His sin also." She pointed the stick toward the horizon where the desert stretched empty and endless. "She does not rest. Not until her secret is spoken." Before Clara could speak again, the wind rose, swirling dust around them. When she wiped her eyes, the ridge was empty. The woman was gone, but lying in the ashes where she'd stood was another bead, white this time, and a single sprig of sage. The night after her encounter with Tsani, Clara hardly slept. The image of the old Apache woman, her sharp obsidian eyes, her words like cold water in Clara's veins, haunted her thoughts. She does not rest, not until her secret is spoken. The warning pressed upon her like a weight she could neither lift nor ignore. By morning, Clara resolved she could no longer remain silent. The house felt smaller than ever, the shadows longer, the air thicker with unspoken truths. She watched James as he moved about the kitchen, polishing his revolver, humming a tune she didn't recognize. He seemed ordinary, the same stoic man who had married her only months before. Yet she sensed a chasm between what she saw and what he carried inside. "James," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to know something." He paused mid-swipe on the gun, his eyes narrowing. "About what?" "It's about Naya, your first wife. The things I've seen. The beads, the footprints, the woman on the ridge. I can't ignore it anymore." James stiffened, and for the first time Clara saw fear flicker across his face. Not fear of her, but something older. Something that had been buried deep. I don't know what you mean," he said, his voice clipped. "Don't lie to me, James." Clara took a step closer. "I know something happened to her. Something you aren't telling anyone. I can feel it. And now," she held out her hand. "Now Tsani came to warn me. She said Naya doesn't rest because of a secret." James's jaw tightened. He set the revolver down with a soft thud. For a long moment he said nothing. The silence was heavier than the desert heat outside. Then quietly he muttered almost to himself, "God help me." Clara's heart pounded. "James, what did you do?" He looked up at her, his face pale and drawn. He swallowed hard. "I didn't kill her, if that's what you think." Clara blinked. "Then what?" He shook his head, running a hand over his face. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. She was going to leave. Take the child. Go back to her people. I begged her not to. I loved her. I still do, but..." Something snapped. "I can't explain it. I thought if I buried the truth I could keep her memory alive." "Protect her? Protect her?" Clara whispered. "Yes, but it's not enough," he admitted. His voice cracked, and for the first time she saw him as a man, not the untouchable sheriff. "I lied to the town, lied to everyone. Said she died of fever, but it wasn't fever. I buried her in secret, and I told no one. Not even the baby's fate." Clara felt the air grow tight around her chest. Her hand shook, and the necklace of beads she still held seemed to burn against her palm. She could see now why Tsani had appeared, why the ridge felt haunted. Naya's story had been hidden, silenced by the man she had trusted. "And now she won't rest," Clara said softly. James nodded, his eyes hollow. "I know. I hear things at night." The baby's cries, her voice. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. But it hasn't, and now you've uncovered her beads. You've awakened her spirit in a way I cannot contain." Clara took a deep breath, her mind racing. "We can't bury it again. Whatever she wanted, it has to be spoken. The truth? James looked at her, the weight of years pressing down on his shoulders. Are you sure you can bear it? Clara met his gaze. I have to. He nodded slowly. Then it's time you know everything. Every lie, every secret, every moment I tried to protect what shouldn't have been hidden. But once it's out, there's no turning back. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, the air vibrating with the weight of unspoken history. Clara felt the house itself listening, as if the walls were leaning closer. Hungry for the truth, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she heard the whisper again, faint but insistent, like a breeze threading through the desert. Listen. The days after James's confession passed in a haze. Clara moved through the house as if wading through water, every shadow and sound amplified in her mind. Even when James was present, the air felt thick with things left unsaid, things buried beneath the desert soil along with Naya. But it was at night that the visions began. The first came 3 nights after James had admitted the truth. Clara woke with a start, her heart hammering to the sound of a baby crying, not the soft wail of a newborn, but sharp, urgent, echoing as if it were coming from inside the walls themselves. She bolted upright in bed, her shawl clutched tightly around her shoulders. The room was empty. James was asleep beside her, breathing evenly. The crib in the corner remained untouched, because there was no crib. Clara rubbed her eyes, telling herself it was a dream. She turned over only to see shadows flickering across the walls. At first they were vague, like the movement of wind through the curtains. But then, unmistakably, she saw a figure, a woman running barefoot through the desert, clutching a tiny bundle wrapped in red cloth. The woman's hair streamed behind her, her face twisted with fear. Clara sat frozen, unable to move, unable to look away. The vision ended abruptly as the woman vanished into the horizon, swallowed by a swirling dust storm that Clara could feel against her skin, though the window was closed. The next night was worse. She awoke to find herself standing in the middle of the bedroom, the necklace of beads warm against her throat. The same whispers came, soft and rhythmic, in a language she did not understand. The voice felt urgent, pleading. She followed it instinctively, stumbling down the hallway. The parlor glowed faintly, though all the lamps were unlit. There, standing by the portrait of Naya, was the woman from her visions. She held the red bundle tightly, her eyes dark and piercing. She cannot rest, the vision said, her voice echoing through the room like a song carried on wind. Not while the truth is buried with the living. Clara tried to speak, but no words came. She could only watch as the vision moved closer to the floor, setting the bundle down carefully, then vanishing like smoke through a keyhole. The bundle lay before her, small and heavy, wrapped in the red cloth she had seen in the visions. Hesitant, Clara unwrapped it, revealing nothing, only the tiniest pair of moccasins and a scrap of cloth embroidered with Naya's mark. A chill ran down Clara's spine. The presence of the child's memory, though intangible, was undeniable. She felt a pressure on her chest, a sense that the desert itself had leaned into the house, watching. That night when James awoke, she told him about the visions. The woman, the red bundle, the whispers. He did not flinch. Instead, he sat quietly, staring into the fire. I've seen them too, he admitted. At night, sometimes I think I hear the baby crying. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought the land itself was punishing me. Clara swallowed hard. Then it's true. Naya's spirit is still here. She's waiting. Waiting for justice, James's jaw tightened. Yes, and I fear what will happen when she's done waiting. Over the following nights, the visions became more vivid. Clara saw Naya running across the desert under a sky that turned blood red at sunset. She saw the baby's small hands reach out, the tiny moccasins scuffing the sand, and the shadow of a man chasing them. She felt the panic, the desperation, the love, all intertwined. With each vision, Clara felt herself drawn deeper into Naya's story, as if the woman's life and death were a thread being stitched through her own. The house no longer felt like a home. It had become a vessel for the past, a place where the living and the dead collided, and every night the whisper returned. Tell the truth. She waits for the truth. Clara realized with a sinking heart that uncovering the sheriff's lies had only begun to unravel the story. The real reckoning, and the one that Naya's spirit demanded in, was still to come. The visions haunted Clara for days. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Naya running across the desert, the red bundle clutched to her chest, the wind tearing at her hair. And each time, Clara felt the weight of the sheriff's secrets pressing down on her, heavier than the summer heat outside. She knew she had to find the truth, no matter how terrible it might be. That morning, she decided to explore the land surrounding the house, retracing the steps she had seen in her visions. She packed a small satchel with water, a knife, and the necklace of beads which now seemed like a talisman more than jewelry. The ridge, the sycamore tree, the open desert, all places she had glimpsed in her dreams, called to her with an urgency she could not ignore. By noon, the sun had climbed high overhead. Sweat ran down Clara's back as she trudged across the dry earth. Then, as she passed the gnarled branches of the old sycamore, something caught her eye. A small mound of disturbed dirt beneath the tree, partially hidden by dry grass. Her heart skipped a beat. She knelt and brushed away the dirt with her hands, revealing the top of a crude wooden marker. Symbols were etched into the wood, the same patterns she had seen in the house carved into the beams in the stone. She felt her stomach twist. Beneath the marker, the earth was soft, as if recently turned. With trembling hands, she dug. The soil gave way to something solid, a small bundle wrapped carefully in red cloth, exactly as she had seen in her visions. She opened it slowly, her breath catching. Inside lay tiny bones, delicate and small, a child's and a woman's. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. Naya had not only been buried in secret, she had been pregnant. Her child had died with her, hidden away from the world, hidden even from the town that had whispered about Naya's fate. Clara sank to her knees, clutching the bundle, the beads of the necklace pressing into her palm. She felt an overwhelming sorrow, a sense of justice denied and a life stolen before it could begin. The whispers returned, soft, urgent. See? Remember. Speak. Suddenly a shadow fell across her, and she looked up to see James standing at the edge of the clearing, his face pale, eyes wide.
Clara,
He said, his voice barely a whisper. She turned to him, holding the bundle in both hands. This is what you hid, James. This is what Naya wanted the world to know. He swallowed hard, stepping closer but keeping a distance, as if afraid to touch the evidence of his sins. I thought I was protecting her. Protecting the baby. I never meant. His voice broke and he buried his face in his hands. Clara rose slowly, the heat of the sun burning against her skin, and looked down at the grave. Protecting? She echoed. You buried a woman and her child to cover your shame. You silenced them, and now they're speaking through me, through these visions, through this land. James said nothing, only nodded miserably. Clara realized that uncovering the hidden child had changed everything. The house, the visions, the whispering wind. It had all been tied to a single truth. Naya's death was not a simple story of illness or misfortune. It was a story of love betrayed, of fear, of secrets buried so deeply they had stirred the dead. The necklace burned against Clara's chest again, and she knew what she had to do. She had to carry the story forward, give Naya and her child a voice that could no longer be silenced. And yet, as she stood there under the relentless desert sun, she felt something else. A presence watching her, patient and knowing. The whispers were fading now, replaced by a calm she had not felt before. Naya's spirit, it seemed, was waiting for one final act. Justice, truth, and perhaps peace. Clara brushed her hands over the mound, smoothing the dirt gently. I will not forget you, she whispered, and I will not let anyone else forget you either. Behind her, James said nothing, but the weight of his sins hung in the air, palpable and raw. The past had finally caught up to him, and to the woman he had loved and lost in the cruelest of ways. The desert was silent again, but Clara knew it would never truly rest. Not until the story was told, the secret revealed, and Naya's child remembered. The sun had barely begun to dip behind the red hills when Clara returned to the ranch house, her hands still stained with the desert soil. The beads around her neck felt heavy, almost alive, and she sensed that Naya's presence, patient, waiting, relentless, was growing stronger. The house, once a place of silence and shadows, now thrummed with expectation, as if it too were aware of what must happen. James was sitting in the parlor, revolver in hand, though he didn't aim it at her. His eyes, hollow with fear and guilt, tracked her movements like a man anticipating judgment. I know what you've done, Clara said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. I know about the child. I know about Naya, and I know you tried to bury it all. James's hands shook and he set the revolver down with a thud. I didn't mean for any of it to happen, he said. His voice broke. I thought I was protecting her. I thought I was protecting myself. You protected nothing, Clara said sharply. You silenced a life, James. You silenced 2 lives. The wind rose suddenly outside, whistling through the cracks in the house. The rocking chair on the porch began to sway violently, though no one touched it. The fireplace flared, sending shadows dancing across the walls. The air smelled of sage and smoke, thick and pungent, and Clara could hear the faintest whisper, Naya's voice, angry yet sorrowful, calling out from every corner of the house. You have to fix this, Clara said, her eyes meeting James's. You have to face what you've done. James swallowed hard. He reached for his coat, then paused as if weighing the impossible. I can't undo it, he said. I can't bring her back. I thought if I buried the past, I could live with it. Living with it doesn't make it right, Clara said. You must speak the truth. Only then will she rest. For a moment, the room fell into tense silence, broken only by the creaking of the floorboards under the invisible wind. Then James rose slowly, his hands trembling, and walked to the fireplace. He retrieved a small box, one he had kept hidden, and placed it on the table before Clara. Inside were letters, a journal, and a few personal effects of Naya's. Her handwriting, her sketches, a tiny moccasin matching the ones Clara had found buried beneath the sycamore. I wrote it all down, James admitted. I wanted to remember her. And the baby. I thought keeping it secret would protect their memory, but it only haunted me. I buried it instead of honoring it. Clara opened the journal and began to read aloud, the words of Naya spilling into the room, sharp and tender all at once. The wind rose higher, shaking the windows and rattling the door frames. The house seemed alive, listening, watching, and waiting. Then the beads around Clara's neck glowed faintly red-hot, and the whisper came again, Justice. James fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, he whispered. I am so sorry. The wind howled through the house, scattering dust and ashes, and for a moment, Clara thought she saw Naya's figure materialize, pale, radiant, holding her child. The woman's eyes were dark but no longer angry. There was sorrow, yes, but also a deep, unmistakable relief. You have spoken the truth, Naya's voice echoed, carried on the wind. Now there is peace. The fire flared one last time, then dimmed. The rocking chair stilled. The house seemed to exhale, releasing decades of anger, grief, and betrayal into the desert night. James remained kneeling, broken and humbled, while Clara gently set the journal down and touched the necklace. She could feel the warmth fading, replaced by a quiet, protective calm. The weight of Naya's presence had lifted, but the memory of the hidden child, the stolen life, and the truth James had buried would remain forever. Outside, the desert stretched silent and still as if holding its breath. The sun had vanished behind the horizon, leaving only the soft glow of twilight. Clara knew that life would never be the same, for her, for James, or for the town of Red Rock. But in the quiet aftermath, she also knew that justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. The desert was quiet the morning after the reckoning. The wind had stilled, leaving only the soft rustle of dry grasses underfoot. Clara stepped outside, the sun warming her back, and looked across the endless expanse of red earth and sandstone ridges. The house behind her, once oppressive with shadows and secrets, now felt lighter, though its walls still held the echoes of the past. James was nowhere to be seen. Clara had searched the house, the stables, even the ridge where Sonny had appeared, but the sheriff had vanished. Only his badge lay on the table inside, half buried in a small pile of sand that had blown in through the open window. Clara picked up the badge, turning it over in her hands. It gleamed faintly in the sunlight, a relic of authority and guilt. She didn't know if James had left voluntarily, or if Naya's spirit had forced him away. Either way, the air felt empty without him, yet strangely free. She returned to the sycamore tree where the hidden grave had been. The earth there was still soft, marked with the small mound she had tended. She knelt and brushed her fingers over the dirt, whispering words of remembrance. I will not forget you, Naya. I will not forget your child. The beads of the necklace, now cool and heavy in her pocket, seemed to hum faintly. Clara placed them atop the grave, arranging them in the same pattern she had seen in her visions. A soft wind swept through the branches, lifting the strands of her hair, and for the first time in months she felt a sense of calm descend over the desert. Weeks passed. Clara settled into the house, carrying on with daily life while the town of Red Rock whispered about the strange events on the Holt Ranch. Some called her brave, others called her unlucky, but Clara no longer worried about their opinions. She carried a truth that was larger than gossip, a story that had to be remembered, a secret reborn through her. She began to prepare for a new life, feeling the shift in herself that could not be explained by the passing of time alone. She noticed subtle changes, an inner strength she had not possessed before, a quiet awareness of the world's hidden layers. And then she realized it. She was carrying new life, the child growing within her, a mix of her own blood and, perhaps a continuation of the lineage that Naya had been denied, was a symbol that the past had not fully claimed. The secret she had uncovered, the life she had unearthed, would continue in a way that no one could erase. At night, the desert was no longer threatening. The wind carried no whispers of anger, only a soft, protective presence. Clara often felt it brushing against her cheeks, gentle as a lullaby, as if Naya herself were watching over her in the life she now nurtured. The town eventually accepted her in its quiet way. People noticed the change in her calm confidence, the subtle authority in her movements. No one knew the full story, though rumors swirled about ghosts, hidden graves, and the mysterious disappearance of the sheriff. Clara never corrected them. Some truths, she decided, needed to remain half-hidden, like seeds planted in the soil, waiting to grow. One evening, standing on the porch, she watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the desert in colors Naya would have loved, deep reds, golds, and purples. She touched the necklace in her pocket and whispered softly, "Your story lives, your child lives, and they will not be forgotten." A gentle wind stirred, lifting the beads slightly as if in acknowledgement. Clara smiled. The past had finally been honored. The secret had been reborn, not as a burden, but as a legacy, a promise that what had been lost would endure. And in the quiet of the desert, with the stars beginning to glitter overhead, Clara knew she was no longer alone. Naya's spirit had found rest. The hidden child story had begun anew, and through her the truth, once silenced, would live on forever.